I would like to introduce Heather Conley. She is the president of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and she will present the next panelists.
Well, good morning. Welcome. I am so excited about this panel and the extraordinary panelists that we have assembled. If I can briefly introduce Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, will be coming here momentarily. He's going to slot, yes, thank you, Prime Minister. That's the empty chair. We have, of course, Latvian Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš with us, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas of Estonia, and Admiral Rob Bauer, Chairman of the NATO Military Committee. I am going to take the moderator's prerogative. I'm going to actually change the title of this panel, and I'm going to use a quote from Prime Minister Kallas, that this panel is going to be entitled Defending NATO Territory from the Very First Minute. That was something that you said in May after the largest NATO exercises in Estonia. Spring Storm happened in May, because it's not defending forward, it's defending every inch of NATO territory. So the Prime Ministers have given me a little bit of permission that I'm actually going to first turn to Admiral Rob Bauer to give everyone a 2-minute level set. And this is your challenge, Admiral, because since 2019, the Military Committee has been working on these regional defense plans, upwards of 4,000 pages of classified material. What I wanted to do was just give you the 2-minute description of these 3 regional defense plans, the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, and then I want to bring our prime ministers into the conversation, what this means. I think this panel, with all due respect to the focus, the exciting news about Sweden that the Secretary General noted today, the important information about Ukraine, this conversation about defending NATO, this generational shift in thinking, I think is the most important thing we're going to talk about today. So there you have it. You, Admiral Bauer, 2 minutes or less. Tell everyone in the audience what they need to know about these 3 regional defense plans.
Okay. We actually now have the plans in place for defending our alliance every inch. And that is basically going back to collective defense. That is the big change. It is based on 2 threats, Russia and terror groups. That is also a big change, that we base our plans on threats. And therefore, we are now working towards, so the regional plans basically look at how do you do that? How do you deter and defend against those 2 threats, given the geography of the different regions? High North in Europe and in the south of Europe. And so that is the practical work of the plans. Out of those plans come then a set of capabilities that you actually need to do the work with, which is the airplanes, the ships, the brigades, etc., etc. So that is the next step, that we talk about what is the set of capabilities we need in all domains: cyber, space, maritime, land, and air. So the set of capabilities is the force structure requirement. The next step is then, how do you command and control these forces once we have them? And the challenge for the next couple of years is that the nations that have agreed to this in this summit, to all these plans, to this force structure requirements, to the command and control adaptation, are going to do what is necessary in terms of getting more people at a higher readiness, more soldiers at a higher readiness, getting the capabilities, buying the systems that we need. So it is more investments. It is investments in infrastructure. It is investments in enablement of, good morning. It is investments in enablement to make sure that we do not only have the fighting forces, but also that we are able to have the logistics in place, that we are able to support the fight as we now see in Ukraine. It's so difficult.
So 3 regional defense plans, high north in the Atlantic, the central plan, which covers the Baltics to the Alps, I think is how you've described it, and then Southeast Europe. Those 3 regional defense plans. Prime Minister Trudeau, welcome.
Good morning. Apologies for...
No. I call this perfect timing because I'm going to throw the first question to you. So no rest for the weary. I'm sorry. Admiral Bauer just described these 3 plans, and really, you just arrived to Vilnius from Riga, where you made a historic announcement about an additional 2,200 Canadian forces that will be in Latvia, a 2.6 billion Canadian dollar contribution. So this obviously has huge implications for Canada's role along the eastern flank, but the regional defense plans also have implications for Canada in the high north and the North Atlantic, a huge area of protection for Canada. Help us understand what these regional defense plans will mean for Canada, and how do you as Prime Minister, convey this to your citizens, how important this is to their security?
Well, I think one of the things that our citizens across all our countries are understanding right now is the world is changing, and not necessarily in reassuring ways. The aggressive posture, not just of Russia in its invasion of Ukraine, but the rise of authoritarian powers that are trying to push the limits of the rules-based order, challenge in every function that they can, try and make might right once again, means we have to be absolutely unequivocal in standing up for them and bringing our citizens along. There's no question that in Canada, like everywhere, inflation's a challenge, housing prices are a challenge, labor shortages are a challenge, the hangovers from the pandemic, worries about climate change. There's so many things going on that additioning to this geopolitical instability as something we also have to step up and spend on requires explaining, but not that much explaining. Canadians understand deeply how if Russia is successful in redrawing lines on a map in Ukraine, then everything else around the world becomes more dangerous and more destabilized. And people are now fully convinced that what happens on the other side of the world does have an impact on them. So Canadians have been extremely supportive of the close to $8 billion that we've invested in military, financial, and humanitarian support to Ukraine over the past short while. And they're also very enthusiastic about what I was announcing with Christianis yesterday, which, as you say, is a doubling of the Canadian contingent in Latvia as we move towards brigade side, along with others, because holding and strengthening NATO's eastern flank against Russia is unbelievably important. But just last summer, I was up in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, which is one of our more northern communities, with Jens Stoltenberg to talk about the posture around the Arctic and how Canada is continuing to make investments in not just in military in the Arctic, but in Arctic sovereignty, which for us goes through the people who live in the Arctic. Infrastructure, communities, economic opportunities, protection of the climate, presence, and active use of Canada's Arctic as part of how we're going to make sure that as unfortunately the Arctic becomes a more and more accessible theater of operations or of interference or of exploitation, Canada and other Nordic countries are very much connected. I say other Nordic countries because a couple of weeks ago I was in Iceland with the Nordic Council talking at great length about what we were going to do to continue to work together to protect our Arctic. But the world is changing. Canadians get that, and I think people throughout the alliance as citizens understand how we need to step up, as Rob was pointing out.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Kanesh, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Obviously, this is an incredibly welcome announcement. What are the challenges very specifically for Latvia integrating Latvian national defense plans into NATO defense plans? Admiral Bauer, I think that is really one of the key challenges of these regional defense plans. And is Latvia sort of struggling a little bit as Lithuania has with the hosting of these additional forces? You have to provide that needed infrastructure. Would welcome your thoughts on how citizens are welcoming this news.
Well, citizens in Latvia are very welcoming. The only disagreement with Canada is occasionally on the ice hockey rink, but otherwise, there's no. There really it's understood the Canadian commitment, and now the additional commitment is very appreciated. But remember, in our country, the development of our also thinking about defense. So prior to 2016, when Russia, with the special operations, annexed Crimea, I think there was a general thinking, not only in my country, but in many NATO countries, that sort of a real attack and territorial defense is maybe not the #1 priority. Since 2016, all of that has changed. So we have the Baltic air policing. The Canadians came in with the EFP. The EFP today has 11 NATO countries, and the Canadian leadership has cracked the nut of making 11 different armies actually be able to work together, units from different militaries. Everyone is in the same standard, but when it comes down to practicalities, people are speaking different languages, different procedures to get all of that working. Now,
Canadians do diversity well.
Yeah, I think so. And now what they're doing is the nut that has been cracked, they're basically doubling the size of that nut. So it's an order of magnitude, not necessarily a new challenge. Now, from our side, we have regionally, I think it's still the largest military base in Ādažs in Latvia. We have approved, appointed money, and the laws have been passed for a new training area, a 5th or 6th training area in Latvia, which will be more than twice the size of the existing one, and actually larger than all the other bases combined, some 25,000 square kilometers. It's a huge, maybe I got that number wrong. Well, you can find it on the website at any rate. But it's a huge training area. So we're making all the investments to host everyone, because also we've reintroduced the conscription in our military. Our defense spending, we were planning on hitting 3% in 2027. Now we've moved forward with the conscription, with a purchase of air defense, with purchase of coastal defense, and with advanced purchase of the rocket artillery, the HIMARS systems. My finance ministry says we could hit 3% next year of defense spending. So we have really upped the game in terms of what we're doing ourselves. The Canadians are, of course, taking a great leadership position here, and we will have additional training areas. So it's sort of doing everything that we've been doing for the past 5-6 years and doing it on a grander scale.
And pressing the foot down on the accelerator, absolutely. Prime Minister Kallas, as I mentioned, Estonia has a 183-mile border with Russia. You've been exceptionally articulate and outspoken about NATO's laser-like focus on defense. In May, Spring Storm, which was the largest NATO exercise in Estonia's history, I mean, how does these these strong regional defense plans, what are the impact for Estonia? Would you like to see a larger British presence there? We had, obviously the UK had 1,500 forces for that exercise. Do you want to see a more beefed up physical presence? What do you think is missing, if anything? What are the challenges that Estonia faces with integrating these forces?
Yeah, first of all, I must say that I'm super happy that we got so strong decisions in Madrid, and now we have the plans that are actually the implementation of those decisions. But what we need to do is that our forces are combat ready. I mean, the Allied forces integrated with our own national forces. The plans are all about that, how that functions, pre-positioned equipment, more ammunition. But what it comes down to is that where are the plans only on paper, or are they really doable and implemented in real life? And that comes down to the defense spending that all the allies are doing. And when I was looking up the figures, it was interesting to see that in 1988, all the NATO's allies invested 2% of their GDP to defense. And why? Because the threat was real. The Cold War and the threat was real. And now 11 allies are doing that, and I have the feeling that maybe there is no such understanding to everybody, or that the threat is real, and even more real as we have a conventional war going on. So what we really have to do is boost our own defense spending, and that means also giving assurances to the defense industry to boost their production, because what we see here, I mean, they talk about the cluster ammunition, it is related to not having other things to give. So in order to be really ready to defend ourselves, we really have to fulfill those plans with the war-fighting capabilities and be combat ready in case it's needed, and it is all necessary for it to be never needed, because then it acts as a deterrence when it's credible.
You've actually advocated for NATO thinking about a new floor for defense spending at 2.5% or even higher. Do you think that's where NATO needs to press all members? Of course, the Wales commitment will be honored next year at the Washington summit, that 2%, does it need to be higher to fulfill these plans? I'll ask that to you, Admiral.
Of course, every ally decides themselves, and it is already, if everybody would do this 2%, that would be already a great deal. I would just, illustrate this. I mean, the period from 1999 to 2021, all the European allies of NATO increased their investment in defense by 23.9%. And US, the same period, 65.7%. And now Russia, the same period of time, 292%. And China, the same period of time, 592% increase. So the point is that the threat is real, and we have to do more. And one more historical fact. In 1933, the investment spending in defense in Estonia was record low because there was no political support. You have other things, investing in education, social affairs, all the worries that you have, domestic problems. And in 1939, it was clear that you have to boost the investment in defense, but it was already too late. It's not like with COVID that we can react when the problem is here, and we can get our act together and react then, but we have to really prepare in advance so that we would not find ourselves in this situation.
Admiral Bauer, I think two questions for me. I mean, do we need the capabilities that are required to implement these regional defense plans? Is spending on track? And there's a time horizon here. As you yourself have said, this is going to take several years. The exercises, the personnel, the capabilities. Do we have that time? How do you manage that? And then I'm going to turn and talk a little bit about Ukraine and the implications there for...
I think I fully agree with Prime Minister Kallas. Time is of the essence here. After we have agreed, the leaders have agreed to the plans. And that's great news because it is historic that we now have for the first time in many, many decades, real plans for changed and much better plans for collective defense. So, but it starts now with doing what we need to do. And that's what I said. It is the investments. So it's not only about the money. The money is necessary to be able to invest. But it's also about more personnel, doing the right sort of exercises, exercising against those plans. No fictitious scenarios anymore. We talk about Russia as a threat in the scenarios. And so we need to do all these things as soon as possible, but it will take time because recruiting more soldiers, building infrastructure, and it's not only in defense, it's also military mobility in Europe. It's still a problem. That is not easy to move things through Europe if it comes to the military and ammunition. And in a war, you want to move ammunition as food through Europe. And it's not easy. It's still a lot of restrictions. So we need together to feel the urgency to actually make it work. And it's not only about the money. There's a lot of work to be done. And it starts tomorrow after the decision, after the summit. We all have to start doing what is necessary to make it work. And it will be difficult and it will take time because it is not a switch, it is a path from where we are to where we need to go. There is a little bit of time, that's the good news, because the Russians are not as good as they were when they started the war. So we have a bit of time because the plans are based on the strength of the Russians when the war started. So if they reconstitute to that position, we're still in a good position with our plans. But we need to do everything that is necessary. And Prime Minister Kallas talked about the industry. That is a serious issue still, that we have to find the right people to connect and to make sure the money becomes available for investments, that they start to invest and to make larger production facilities. It's simple as that.
I know you've been working since 2019, but the work begins today, and that urgency, that's the clear message. Prime Minister Trudeau, I'd like to change slightly, but it's the same thing. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba wrote in Foreign Policy a few days ago, he was making an argument that let's not think what NATO can do for Ukraine as we contemplate the packages, but what Ukraine can do for NATO. And he was suggesting that a Ukrainian brigade is going to be defending NATO's eastern flank, a hardened, capable Ukrainian military. Are we not thinking sufficiently about how the Ukrainian military, when they are in NATO, will actually be a huge additive to protecting NATO's eastern flank? And I really would love your reflections as we go down the panel, and then I'm going to add a second part to that. We've witnessed an extraordinary historical moment within Russia the last 2 weeks. Prigozhin's mutiny, we're still trying to ascertain what that means. But the shift in Belarus, does this now start arguing for different thinking along the eastern flank? Because Belarus now, with Russian tactical nuclear weapons, we may have Wagner very much engaged in Belarus. Does this change any thinking? Please.
Well, first, in regards to Ukraine, when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, Canada was one of the countries that decided to step up right away and start training the Ukrainian military. And from 2015 onwards, we trained up till the beginning of the war about 35,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces, and since then have only stepped up. I was actually just meeting with some Canadian military trainers in Latvia who are doing a senior officer and a middle officer corps training exercise in Latvia, and for Ukrainians. And what we've seen is, yes, we all knew that a large Soviet-style army gets to defeat a smaller Soviet-style army, but the Russians, who have a large Soviet-style army now, are not able to defeat what was a small Soviet-style army in Ukraine, but is now actually a modern equipped, but more importantly, modern trained military. And the way they're using the officer corps, the way they are actually smarter about modern warfare has been a huge part of that holding off of the Russian effectiveness. But the really interesting thing that I've talked with our trainers about is even as they are training up on all sorts of advanced tactical and strategic points and equipment use, the immediate feedback from the Ukrainian fighters and leaders who are testing this right away on the battlefield, who are seeing how they work in different tactics, who are giving a fresh perspective on very strong theory, has been an incredible symbiosis. And what we are learning and drawing on from this very real war that's going on right now is feeding in not just our need to, as Rob said, continue to step up on more ammunition, on more procurement, on better preparation for what's next, but actually understanding what is most impactful and effective. And there's an expression that everyone's always preparing the equipment they wish they'd had in the last conflict instead of looking towards the next one. And that's where the hybrid warfare, the disinformation, the misinformation, the cyber capacities, all the different things that are coming together, even responding to the ecocide that was the destruction of the dam. These kinds of things are coloring everything we do and everything we have to think about what could be coming next.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Karas, how do you feel about Ukraine being an additive to your defense?
Absolutely. I mean, as Justin was saying, today we're training Ukrainians, and I'm convinced that tomorrow they'll be training us, because which army in Europe has now the experience of actually fighting the Russians? It is the Ukrainians, and they're learning. They're surprisingly, or maybe not so surprising, they're fantastically adaptable to all kinds of weapon systems. Imagine the complexity. They're getting all kinds of different equipment, and they're able to train up to use many different. So within our own armies, you have one type of system, and everyone learns that one type of system. They're adapting to all the different systems that we have, which is actually a challenge in terms of simplicity of platforms that we have to think about in NATO. But they will be eventually training us. But the point of NATO and Ukraine's future role in NATO is remember that Russia only understands strength and power. And the reason they're fighting the war in Ukraine is because they wrongly but perceived Ukraine as being weak and an easy target because it was in the gray area of not in NATO. NATO's value add is, of course, our preparedness and the fact that Russia understands that preparedness. Now, regarding Belarus, we in Latvia have been, it's 2 years now that we have daily experience with the hybrid attacks physically on our borders. So the Belarusian government organizes planes full of people from third countries and physically moves them to the border, tries and sometimes succeeds in cutting the fences and encouraging, if not forcing people to illegally enter into the European Union. So they have effectively helped us to train ourselves to have a seamless interaction between the border guard, police, and the National Guard with surveillance, etc., where we're fully aware of this. So the threat is very real. The threat of disinformation, the threat of cyber is real. In Latvia, we have the Stratcom Center of Excellence. In Estonia, it's the cyber, and it's maybe no coincidence that in our countries we have these two centers. These are very real threats. But with Wagner coming into, or potentially coming into Belarus, I don't think that anyone seriously thinks that even 5,000 or 6,000 soldiers would now be a direct military threat to NATO. But imagine even 500 well-trained, ruthless mercenaries attempting the migrant route, and what would they do if they came into Europe. So our awareness on the border in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Poland, all of our services, they're in constant contact and observing the groups who tend to try one place, then another, then a third place. So there's very well situational awareness on our side, but we need to keep that heightened because that threat is not going anywhere. And with Prigozhin and if anyone thinks that, Putin is now weak, maybe on some level, that is, if there are two bulldogs fighting and one is weaker, it doesn't mean the other one is a poodle. It means the other one is still a bulldog. And we're not expecting any lessening of the threat. So we don't see anything changing in Russia, shall we say, for the better. So that means that on our side, literally on our side of the fence, we have to up the game of preparedness and just keep our eyes open. And I think all of our eyes, not only us in the Baltics, but all of our eyes are now open.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Kallas.
Actually, I don't have a lot to add. I mean, it was already said by previous speakers. I would just add one thing. I mean, reading about the NATO enlargement and when the Visegrad countries were accepted to NATO, then one of the German representatives, and I don't remember who exactly it was, said that it would be, let's accept the Poles because Poland, because it would be so much better when the Poles are fighting for us and not the Germans. And actually, that could be the same quote right now. I mean, the Ukrainians are fighting for us so that the Americans, Canadians, Latvians, Estonians don't have to do that. So that's why I think the point that you made, that they bring something to the table, and as Christiani said, I mean, they are the only army that has actual experience of fighting the Russians right now. That is the biggest threat.
Thank you. So I'd like to welcome any questions. There's a microphone right in the middle, so I'm going to have you line up at that microphone right in the middle, and please introduce yourself. We have a quick 10 minutes. I'm going to, while you're making your way to the microphone, we're getting a lot of questions about this balance about China and the Russia challenge, and in fact, there was one question, Prime Minister Trudeau, to you, that as Canada is obviously now really increasing its presence in Latvia along the eastern flank, does it have the defense resources to be able to manage the threat towards the North Pacific? So we're going to take the four, I see three colleagues, really rapid fire, so we can get turned back to the panel. So Ziggy, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Ziggy Spavlionis from Ambassador in Washington, D.C. Of Lithuania. Maybe one question to Prime Minister Trudeau. You know, in Europe, we are more or less united on making a clear path for Ukrainians' NATO membership. But we have a problem in Washington. Why don't you, as neighbors of Americans, help us in Washington for them not to make the same mistake as we did in Bucharest altogether? Because if we do that mistake today in Vilnius, Baltics could be in trouble.
Thank you, Ziggy.
And Olena Halushka, International Center for Ukrainian Victory. It will be very complicated for me to put my question after Mr. Paviljonis, but I also have the question to Prime Minister Trudeau. That's the question basically from 40 million of Ukrainians, and Canada as a very strong supporter of Ukraine, which has always been. Will you support Ukraine's invitation to NATO at the Vilnius summit? And will you help us to use this last hours before the final decision is made to convince those governments which are reluctant to make this historic yet very important move, particularly the US and Germany? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. I apologize. We're going to have to end on time, sir. We'll take your question.
Good morning. Carlos Bukovskis from the Latvian Institute of National Affairs. I'm going to ask a question, which in this case probably is more of a citizen's question, to Prime Minister Kallas and you, in this case, echoed something that the Secretary General already mentioned before in the morning about the providing cluster bombs to Ukraine, as this is the last ammunition that we have to provide. So my provocative question is, doesn't that send a little bit of message that NATO has no ammunition left anymore, so that we're sending the last one and this is the last one? Thank you.
Thank you. And I would certainly encourage everyone to ask U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan some of those questions that you were asking the panel later today. But Prime Minister Trudeau, and we have about 8 minutes left, let me just go down the row, if I may. Clearly, Ukraine and the message that the summit will deliver is top of everyone's minds. We'll have that and any ammunition and sort of, again, that defense production issue that's going to keep coming back. But we'll begin and then we'll just work our way down.
Canada has been unequivocal from the very beginning on support of Ukraine, and not just because we have the largest Ukrainian diaspora outside of Russia in Canada and have for about 100 plus years been welcoming Ukrainians to settle our prairies, but also because Canadians understand that standing up against Russia here is standing up against any country with a slightly larger army that has designs on its neighbor's territory, which would lead to chaos and destabilization around the world. So as a matter of principle and a matter of friendship, Canadians are absolutely firm on our support of Ukraine, including on welcoming in Ukraine to NATO when the conditions allow. And that's what I said a few weeks ago when I was with Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. And that's certainly what we're talking about here. I know that is not a unanimously held position amongst NATO, but I also know that there has been a lot of really substantive discussion to get to a place where there is a clear path for Ukraine, because Ukrainians, as they fight, are asking themselves, okay, how does this end, and how do we make sure this doesn't start again? Even if we win now, or even if we stop now, what's to prevent 4 years from now a rearmed Russia from trying again and not missing it this time? And that is making sure there's a clear path into NATO. And I think I'm fairly confident that where we're going to get here in this meeting will give that clear support to Ukrainians, so that they know there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. Thank you. Prime Minister Karins.
The same question on Ukraine. Well, for me, it seems very simple. We want peace in Europe, and there's two ways to have that. One very theoretical, that something massively changes in Russia. I'm not holding my breath. The second is to get rid of the gray areas and make it very clear to Russia where their limit is, and that is NATO. So only when Ukraine will be in NATO will we be able to have a stable peace. It's not a complete peace, because Russia will still be there, Russia will still be a threat, but it's only then. So to me, it seems very obvious this has to be the exit of this conflict, that an independent, a liberated Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. The only way for a stable peace.
Prime Minister, what would your message be to President Biden on this question?
Well, we have been sending those messages, and we are talking about these things. I think fundamentally we have the same view. And again, I mean, going back to Clinton and Gore, who said that when the NATO was enlarging, that we can't leave Ukraine out in the cold with a furry neighbor besides them. So I think we have the obligation. But as Justin said, for us it is very important that we have the path, we have concrete steps that we agree how this is going to happen. We understand that it can't, happen while the war is going on, but concrete steps by moving closer to, steps like having this constant review, seeing that the systems are interoperable, all the things that we can do, and when the opportunity window opens, then we can do this in order to stop this. Because I'm of the belief that the only security guarantee that is the cheapest and that really works is NATO's membership. I mean, our countries are a living example of it. Now, coming to the question that was directly addressed to me, then of course we have our stocks, we have enough to defend our countries. We all do. I mean, we give what we can give so that we are not left defenseless. And this is all the talk, I mean, because it is all the talk about what we can give so that we don't let our guard down, because the threat is still real. And having, I mean, that we have given so much, then it also has to come from somewhere. And then it comes to the production that hasn't really doubled or tripled while we are giving everything away and ordering new things, and the production or the procurement deadlines are way too long. So how can we really shorten those? And I totally agree, it's not about the money, but what we do with the money and where we invest the money. I mean, the collective defense, thinking about defense regionally, not every country, their own, but like we do with Latvians. We have agreed that, our threat can come through Latvia. So that means that our forces can also be protecting and defending Latvia, and that's why, I mean, one thing is helping Ukraine, and the other thing is also boosting our own defense.
Absolutely. Admiral Bauer, I'm going to provoke and say, honestly, there's 4 regional defense plans. Ukraine, in many ways, is NATO's regional defense plan as we strengthen their military capabilities, as we train them, as we create and help support their quest to liberate their territory. How do you, moving from this day forward, with those regional defense plans in place, all the work that you have to do, how much are you adapting to Russia's reconstitution? And they are learning on the battlefield as well. How much are these regional defense plans living in response to Russia's adaptation of its military?
Yeah, it's a living document, these plans. And I think everybody needs to understand that if the threat changes, then we will adapt those plans. And then we will have to respond to the change, and that is what we will continue to do. As I said, and that is important, the plans are now based on the threat that was Russia before they started the war, the full-fledged war in Ukraine on 24th of February 2022. So I think we are, for now, we're good if we do what we have agreed in the plans. So it is now to all the nations that they have to implement the changes, invest in the capabilities, get more people, be readier, because otherwise it still doesn't work. If the Russians will reconstitute and in certain areas will become bigger, better than they were, then we will respond to that.
As I said, this is the most important part of the NATO summit you may not hear as much about, but this is where we defend every inch of NATO territory. With your applause, would you please kindly thank our wonderful panelists for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this engaging session, and thanks for the audience engagement. Now we are having a 15-minute break. 15-minute break, and after that we will have more for you to come. Please, everyone, take your seats, and we will continue our public forum here in Vilnius, Lithuania. The next section will be in the spotlight with another distinguished NATO guest, the NATO Deputy Secretary General. So now, I give the floor to Benedikt Fanke, the Vice Chairman and CEO of Munich Security Conference, the moderator of the session.
And not only a proud co-host of this meeting, but also the number 2 at our institution. And who better to interview on stage than the number 2 at NATO? Great to have my good friend, the Deputy Secretary General, with us today. I've been given 2 pieces of instructions. A, use the whooping 20 minutes that we get to talk about everything that the Secretary General didn't talk about. And make sure that you understand one thing, and it seems to be very important. Please don't line up behind the microphone. Go to the microphone once I point at you directly. We'll practice this in a minute. Because we're such good friends.
But it's good to be number 2.
It is brilliant to be number 2. Yeah. The number 1 sits there,
NATO.
so I'm a happy number 2.
And thank you for lending Boris Ruge to us. He will be our new Assistant Secretary General for for Policy and Security, replacing Bettina. And also we have our new ASG for PDD. Bonjour, madame. Bien sûr, la bienvenue. So it's good to be number 2, indeed.
Excellent. Yeah, and please give Boris back when you're done with it. So, you know, some of the things that the Secretary General didn't talk about. China, climate change, cooperation between the European Union and NATO. But for some reason, he also missed talking about Greek and Roman goddesses. And I have a couple to go through. Amongst many other things, you're responsible for innovation at NATO. And let's talk about Diana. Diana, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, and the Roman goddess, not only of hunting, childbirth, but most importantly, of crossroads. Did you know that? So we at NATO, we in the Alliance, are certainly at crossroads when it comes to innovation. And I'm wondering, are we taking the right turn? Are we going in the right direction? Are we learning the right lessons on innovation from the war in Ukraine?
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I chair the Innovation Board in NATO. I'm very happy that with the Munich Sicherheit Conference we have this partnership between our advisory groups. There's nothing more fundamental for our alliance and for the free world than to maintain our technological edge. It's the essence of who we are, the essence of our economies, of our militaries, and in the end, this is something that NATO is doing. So, to be honest, I'm also pleasantly surprised how fast allies have moved and we moved on this one. So we discussed about Diana just 2 years back, I think. Now it's up and running. The first challenge is up for startups and innovators that would like to work with us. More than 100 test centers and accelerators across our great alliance in Europe and North America. Universities, research centers, the best and the finest. Because if you look to what NATO countries do possess, we are basically in an ecosystem of innovation that has absolutely no rival. And this is why we are working on Diana. And it goes hand in hand with the other total innovation. We have launched the NATO Innovation Fund, which is the first ever multinational sovereign venture capital fund. Sounds like a contradiction in terms? No, because we also feel the need to put a little bit of seed money into the startups that are using Diana. Smart idea. We help the young innovators from all over the alliance to cross the valley of death until and unless, of course, they will go to the real markets and the real venture capital world. So yes, we are doing good. We're working with our partners. I remember inviting an Australian cyber/quantum company to brief us. We are talking to Korea, to South Korea, to Japan, to many of our partners. So yeah, technological edge is the underpinning of everything we do in defense, in economy, in society, in democracy. So I would like everyone to know that we are really doing our best to move forward on that one too. So Diana, as a goddess, I think should be pleased with NATO today.
Excellent. You mentioned money first. Let's turn to another god, Plutus, the god of wealth and abundance and defense investment, I have you know. As we pointed out in our wonderful report that came out last week, sorry for the advertising here, defense sitters. We make the point that a lot of us in Europe are still sitting on the fence when it comes to defense, particularly when it comes to investment. So how do we get more Plutos, particularly in Europe? How do we increase investment in innovation? You did mention that we put a little money into the innovation fund. How do we get more money in there?
Listen, we don't want NATO to be a substitute for what national governments and private sector are doing or academia are doing. We think and we are acting as a catalyst for harnessing the innovation ecosystem across our great alliance. So in a way, we are sending a demand signal. As we are sending a demand signal to our defense industrial base, through the NATO planning processes, through the new regional plans that our leaders will be adopting in a few hours from now. We're also sending a demand signal to the technological world when it comes to NATO. As you know, we have Allied Command Operations in shape, led by General Cavoli, and also have Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, led by General Lavigne, who is also working on DDA, defense planning, but also the capstone concept, which is the technological angle from NATO. So what we are also doing to governments, and this is also we are trying to help allies avoid a false dilemma. Because until the war in Ukraine that Russia started so brutally and aggressively, there was lots of people thinking that the next generation of warfare and technology should be only high-end. High-end, and less, let's say, more substantive forces. So now we have basically a situation you have back in Europe, high-intensity warfare, so you need to invest more to have conventional and multi-domain forces, and also to invest in high-end technologies. So what NATO does is making sure that we avoid, for allies, the false dilemma of saying I should do either technology, high-end, or conventional deterrence and defense. No, it's one thing, it's multi-dimensional, it's multi-domain, as we call it. And again, NATO is an aggregator and an organization that sends a demand signal to our governments, to our private sector. So we don't see any fracture, which would be, I think, artificial and counterproductive between having strong conventional deterrence and defense forces and high-end space, cyber, sensors, integrated issues. So that's the beauty of NATO, that we are the great aggregator. And I think also Greek mythology is helping us with finding the role for NATO. We are doing this actively, and this summit in Vilnius will be nothing short of exceptional. We expect our leaders to reconfirm and to confirm the new defense investment pledge, the Vilnius pledge, in Wales, 2% minimum and 20% of the 2% as a minimum also for higher end new equipment, new technologies. So we hope that this will be very positive for all our allies and also for our citizens, because in fact the business of NATO is to keep 1 billion citizens safe. Security is the foundation of prosperity. Security is the foundation of democracy. Security is the foundation of normal life for our citizens. And also with the Swedish new allies, we are looking forward to having them too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. From the god of wealth and defense investment to the goddess of victory, Nike. When we had the previous panel, one of the prime ministers said, today we are training the Ukrainians, tomorrow they will be training us. Can you maybe shed some light on how we are already interacting with the Ukrainians on innovation and what innovation has proved helpful and how to roll it out to the troops?
I would say we are in a very interesting cycle of what I would call circular lessons learned. They learn a lot from us. We've been training Ukrainian troops after 2014, after the illegal occupation of Crimea by Russia, in large numbers. I've seen Prime Minister Trudeau here just before us, and Canada only has trained since 2014 tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops. So Ukrainians are learning a lot from us. Command and control, NATO doctrine, how to use smart equipments. And they're moving away from the Soviet era, not only equipments, but also doctrine, which is so obsolete and so underperforming. But we're also learning from them. It's not only us, our militaries, but also our private sector. Lots of things we do for Ukraine are coming from governments, but also from private sector. For cyber, for space, for smart apps. And I think also NGOs working embedded in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, like we do not do in NATO. So I think it's a circular lessons learned process, and we are looking forward to making these things even more structured. So they learn from us, we learn from them, and together we are stronger.
Perfect, many thanks. Now that I have warmed you up, let's turn to you and let's begin to grill the DSG. Can I see a hand?
This is for number twos? Too?
That's for number twos, yes.
Okay. That's advertisement
and
for the job.
Can I warn you, my staff has printed out a 5-page list of Greek and Roman goddesses, major and minor. If you don't ask questions, I'll just continue with the god of war, the goddess of wilderness, and some others. So
okay,
you better
grilling,
raise your
grilling.
hands now. Please, sir, come to the microphone.
Hello, Tomasz Smura, Kazimierz Płaski Foundation from Poland. I've got a question which was not asked in previous panel. I mean the question about, of course we are in the Vilnius, but we have still some homework to do from Madrid. I mean especially new NATO force structures. So we decided that we increase our number of the troops in high readiness status to 300,000. And actually we also heard some rumors that there are still significant problems to deliver on this promise. So I'd like to ask where we are in the process of